The moment they said my name, I knew something was wrong. Not because of the words, but because of the tone. Flat, cold, carefully controlled in a way that made everything around it feel rehearsed. Can you step forward for a second? Every conversation in the room didn't stop all at once. It faded, like people were pretending not to listen, while listening to every single word. I stood up slowly, not confused, not nervous, just aware. Because moments like this don't come out of nowhere. They build. Quietly, piece by piece. Until one day, someone decides it's time to make it public. I walked toward the front, feeling the weight of eyes tracking every step. Some curious, some uncomfortable. Some already convinced they knew exactly what was about to happen. That was the worst part. Not the situation, but the certainty. People love certainty, even when they're wrong. My manager didn't meet my eyes at first. He shuffled a few papers he didn't need, adjusted his stance like he was buying himself a few extra seconds. Then finally looked up, gave me a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You've been with us for a while now?" he started. At that line again, I almost smiled.
Ow.
Because everyone in that room knew what came after that sentence. It was never followed by anything good. "We've reviewed your performance." There it was. The script. Polished. Safe. Designed to sound fair, even when the decision had already been made long before today. Behind me, I could hear someone whisper. Soft, but not soft enough. I knew it. A quiet chuckle followed. Not loud. Not bold. Just enough. Enough to make sure I heard it. Enough to turn the moment into something more than just a decision, into a scene. Into a story they would repeat later. I didn't turn around. Didn't react. Because reactions are what people wait for in moments like this. They don't just want to see you fall. Want to see how you fall. My manager continued, clearing his throat like he needed to convince himself more than me. "We've decided to let you go. Simple, direct, final. No explanation that actually mattered. No detail that would change anything. Just a decision, delivered like it was already old news." The silence that followed was heavier than the words. Because this was the part where I was supposed to respond. Ask why. Argue. Defend myself. Give them something to justify the scene they had just created. But I didn't. I just nodded once, calm, measured, like I had been expecting it. That made them uncomfortable. I could feel it, because this wasn't how it was supposed to go. I was supposed to look surprised, maybe embarrassed, maybe even desperate. Instead, I just stood there, still, controlled, unbothered, and that shifted something, just slightly. Just enough for a few people to stop smiling, for a few whispers to die before they fully formed, for doubt to enter the room. "You'll need to clear your desk," he added quickly, like he wanted to regain control of the moment. "HR will assist you." Of course they would. Always HR. Always procedure. Always clean. It's always distant. I nodded again, then turned. And that's when I saw them. The ones who had been whispering. The ones who had been watching. The ones who had already decided what this moment meant. One of them smirked. Another looked away too late. One didn't even bother hiding it. He laughed, quiet but clear. That was the moment. Not the firing, not the speech, not the decision. That laugh, that single careless sound. That turned this from something temporary to something I wouldn't forget. I adjusted my sleeve slightly. Took one step toward the exit, then another. Calm, steady, like none of it mattered. But right as my hand reached the door, it opened, and everything changed. The door didn't just open, it stopped everything. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in a way that pulled. Tension without asking for it. Because the person standing there wasn't supposed to be here. At least not today, not in this room. And definitely not at this exact moment. For a second, no one reacted. Not my manager. Not the people who had been whispering. Not even the ones who had. Just been laughing, because recognition takes time and denial. Takes even longer, but I recognized him immediately. The posture, the presence, the way the room seemed to shrink around him without him saying a single word. The CEO? He stepped inside calmly. His gaze moving across the room, Not rushed, not searching, just aware, like he already knew what he was walking into. Like this wasn't unexpected. Like this had been timed. "Continue," said simply, his voice even controlled, but no one continued, because whatever momentum the room had before was gone. My manager straightened instantly, his earlier confidence replaced with something tighter, more careful. "Sir, we were just... I heard enough." 3 words. That was all it took. Not loud, not aggressive, but final. The kind of final that doesn't leave room for explanations or excuses or adjustments. Just silence. He took a few steps forward, his eyes briefly landing on me, not questioning, not surprised, just confirming. That small glance said more than anything else in that room. Behind me, I could feel it shifting. The same people who had been relaxed just moments ago were now rigid, still watching, trying to understand something that no longer made sense. Because the script had changed, and they hadn't been given the new version. My manager cleared his throat again. This time it didn't help. "Sir, we were finalizing a termination. I'm aware of what you were doing." Interruption was smoother. This time, sharper, more deliberate, and somehow colder. He turned slightly, letting his gaze move across the room, taking everyone in, measuring not just what had happened, but who had been part of it, who had watched, who had participated, who had enjoyed it. Because moments like this don't just reveal decisions, they reveal people, and people rarely realize they're being revealed until it's too late. "Interesting timing," he said quietly, not to anyone specific, but loud enough for everyone to hear that word. Again, timing. I felt it too. The exact moment where everything starts to tilt, where what looked certain begins to crack. My manager tried to recover. Tried to step back into control. This was based on performance reviews, and whose reviews? That stopped him completely. Because it wasn't a complicated question, but it was the kind of question that exposes complicated answers. Answers no one wants to explain in a room full of witnesses. I approved the process. My manager said carefully, like each word had to pass through fear before it reached his mouth. The CEO nodded once. Slow, measured, then looked back at me. And this time, there was something different in his expression. Recognition wasn't the right word. It was closer to certainty. Like he wasn't seeing me for the first time, like he had already made a decision long before he walked through that door. "You were leaving?" he asked. Simple, direct. But the room leaned into that question, because suddenly, my answer mattered. More than the firing, more than the whispers, more than the laugh. I paused for just a second, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I understood exactly what this moment was. This wasn't about the exit anymore. This was about the shift. "I said calmly. The CEO nodded again, then glanced briefly at the door behind me, then back at me. And for the first time since he entered, there was the faintest hint of something unexpected. Not anger, not frustration, something quieter, something heavier. Disappointment? Good quotes. "Good," he said. The word landed strangely, confusing, out of place, until he took one more step forward. "And everything that came before it finally made sense, because I'd rather you didn't leave like this." He paused, just long enough for the entire room to hold its breath, then finished the sentence. "Boss." And just like that, the room didn't just go silent, it broke. The word boss hung in the air. It wasn't meant as a title, not like the ones they were used to. It was recognition, authority, ownership, power that no one in that room had expected. I felt every eye snap toward me, some in disbelief, some in horror, and a few quietly calculating. My manager froze. His mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. He had rehearsed every line of this firing, every subtle smirk, every staged glance, and yet none of it prepared him for this. I turned slowly toward the room, letting the silence stretch. It wasn't arrogance. Not yet. Just presence. It's the kind of presence that fills a space without demanding it. Everyone clear on who's in charge here? The CEO asked, his eyes scanning the room like a spotlight. Murmurs spread. It's nervous, hushed, questioning the same. People who had laughed just minutes ago now shifted in their seats, unsure whether to look down or flee the room. I smiled faintly, just enough to acknowledge them, because understanding had to come slowly. No, I asked, my voice calm, confident, controlled. The room went quieter, the kind of quiet where every thought is loud, every heartbeat is loud, every misstep is loud. My manager coughed. Weak. Nervous, sir. I'll handle it, the CEO said sharply, and that was it. The shift was complete. I walked toward the front, past my stunned coworkers, past the whispers and side glances, until I reached the space where my manager had just humiliated me. Everyone could see me now. The air changed. Tension unlike anything. Before filled the room, people were no longer laughing. Were calculating, waiting, second-guessing every choice they had made in the past hour. And then, almost automatically, they started treating me differently. Like I wasn't just an employee who had been fired. Like I was someone they should have respected all along. I looked at my manager. The same man who had smiled while saying I was leaving, his confidence had evaporated. His control was gone, and in its place, uncertainty, fear, respect, all at once. I reached out, picked up the papers from the desk he had tried to use as his shield, and set them neatly in front of the CEO. Simple, his gesture. Small, but deliberate. It said more than any speech could. That I wasn't just back in the room. I had always belonged there, and now. The room finally understood it. Asterisk, the reactions were immediate. A few people gasped. Some mouths opened and closed like they were trying to swallow their pride whole. A low murmur of disbelief rippled through the room. The same colleagues who had whispered, snickered, and shared secret jokes just moments ago froze. No one knew what to say. No one knew how to act, because the story they had been telling themselves had just collapsed. My manager looked like he had aged 10 years in 10 seconds. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, eyes darting. Between the CEO and me, trying to find a lifeline, there wasn't one. The CEO, calm and composed, finally broke the silence. Everyone here knows why this company succeeds, he said, voice even but cutting through the tension like a blade. It's because we recognize talent and leadership, even when others fail to see it. The words landed heavily, each syllable shaking the foundation of their assumptions. I stepped closer.
Making sure to pause long enough for everyone to
Absorb it. I wasn't fired, I said calmly, deliberately. I was being underestimated. Another pause, a glance around. People's faces turned red. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats. You see, I continued, lowering my voice just enough to draw attention. I've been working quietly, learning, building, and apparently I did it better than anyone expected. A few eyes widened. Recognition slowly replaced disbelief. My manager swallowed, trying to speak. But the CEO raised a hand. Let him finish, the CEO said. That simple act, that small acknowledgement, destroyed whatever thin veil of authority my manager had left. I'm still the same person you thought you could humiliate, I said, letting a tiny smirk creep in, but now the difference is, you're the one under scrutiny. The room held its breath. The snickers were gone. The laughter that had dared to poke at me extinguished. People began whispering again, but this time it was different. They weren't plotting humiliation. They were recalculating their positions. Measuring every word they had spoken, my eyes scanned the room slowly, savoring the subtle shift, from arrogance to caution, from mockery to hesitation, from certainty to doubt. It was intoxicating, not revenge. Not yet, just awareness. They finally realized the gap between what they assumed and what was real, and that gap, that was mine to own. I straightened my back, leveled my gaze at my manager, then at my colleagues. A silent message passed without words. I had been underestimated, humiliated, and sidelined. And none of it had mattered, because the truth had a way of revealing itself. And tonight, it did, loudly, clearly, and unmistakably. The CEO finally stepped forward, his gaze sweeping across the room. Every eye followed him, not just mine. He didn't need to speak loudly. His presence alone commanded attention. "Let's be clear," he said, voice measured but undeniable. "Leadership isn't about seniority, connections, or who laughs the loudest in a room. Leadership is about vision, integrity, and results. And some of you clearly forgot that." Heads nodded nervously. Some shifted in their seats. Others tried to hide their embarrassment. I stayed silent, letting the words sink in, because this wasn't my moment to speak. Not yet. It was theirs to absorb. The people who had mocked me, who had whispered behind my back, now sat frozen. Even my manager looked like he was recalculating his career choices in real time. The CEO's eyes met mine, a subtle nod, recognition, respect, approval. Then he turned back to the room. "And as for you," he said, pointing slightly in my direction, "this person demonstrates exactly the kind of leadership we need here. Effective immediately, you will resume your role with all responsibilities intact." A collective intake of breath spread through the room. Whispers turned into stammered apologies. Unsure where to look or what to say, I smiled faintly, not arrogantly, not boastfully, just enough to acknowledge the shift that had just happened, because it wasn't about revenge. It was about balance being restored. The CEO continued, "Let this be a lesson. Underestimating talent is costly, not just for the company, but for anyone who assumes they are untouchable." A few employees shifted uncomfortably. Some avoided eye contact. A couple tried to force small, nervous smiles. I walked past my manager slowly, letting my presence speak louder than words. Every whisper, every laugh, every dismissive glance, they had all been absorbed, processed, and turned into quiet shock. It was subtle, but unmistakable. The power had shifted, and everyone in the room knew it. Finally, I turned to the CEO. "Thank you," I said simply. His nod was brief. No theatrics, no fanfare, just acknowledgement. And in that acknowledgement, I felt the weight of every insult, every smirk, every laugh dissolve. I had been underestimated. I had been humiliated. But now was recognized, truly, completely, irrevocably. The room had gone completely silent. Not the polite silence of a meeting, not the awkward silence of someone being reprimanded. This was the silence of realization. The kind of silence that hits hard when people understand they've been wrong all along. I stood at the front, calm, measured, unshaken. Every eye in that room was on me. Every smirk, every whisper, every mocking glance from earlier had evaporated. My manager finally found his voice, but it was weak, trembling. "Ah," I thought. His words faltered, collapsing under the weight of what had just happened. The CEO's gaze cut through him like a knife. "Save it," he said coldly. Then he turned back to the room. "Let this be clear," the CEO continued, voice sharp and deliberate. "Mockery, underestimation, or arrogance will not be tolerated in this company. Respect and competence are not optional." The realization hit my colleagues like a wave. Those who had laughed earlier now slouched in their chairs, unsure where to look. Some avoided my gaze entirely. Others shifted nervously, realizing they had misjudged me entirely. I finally spoke. Not loud, not boastful. It's just clear. "Everything you assumed about me today was wrong," I said. "And the ones who assumed they were untouchable, they just learned otherwise." A few gasps echoed. One or two whispered apologies. I let it linger. Every second amplified the lesson. Then I looked directly at my manager. "You thought firing me would end this chapter. But you forgot one thing: you never measured who I really am." And now the narrative has changed. His face paled. He opened his mouth and closed it again. It was over. Every person in that room understood the shift. The CEO finally nodded at me, signaling the official end of the humiliation for me, and the beginning of it for them. And with that nod, the murmurs turned to whispers of respect, a few cautious smiles replacing former smirks, and an unmistakable recognition of authority. I straightened, calm and composed, knowing the balance of power had completely shifted. For once the people who mocked, underestimated, and doubted me had no choice but to acknowledge it's my place, not just in the company, but in the room, in the story, and in the future. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to, because sometimes the most powerful statement is simply being right, standing tall, and letting the truth do the talking. And tonight, the truth had spoken louder than any laugh, any smirk, or any humiliation ever could.